Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Chris Winchell. Chris, for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, more than happy to. So my name is Chris Winchell. I'm from the Memphis, Tennessee area. I've been in Memphis, Tennessee about 12 years. I'm married to my beautiful bride as of 10 years. Lauren, we have 4 amazingly wonderful children at the time of this recording. I have one that is 6. I have twins that are 4 years old, and I have a 2-year-old. And I like to joke that God taught me so much about biblical multiplication and disciple making that I did it biologically. I didn't just do it spiritually. So twins in the middle, which was an amazing journey, unexpected. The Lord is very gracious. In Memphis, I do steward a number of businesses, and I think stewardship is certainly a key word and how I try and live and how I view lifestyle and serving the kingdom. So I serve a number of different businesses in the Memphis area, ranging from home services to transportation to finance, all of the above. And at the same time, I do steward a small gathering out of my house alongside some co-labor partners, and we have an amazing church family. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, now with your business, actually, you have a charitable arm, well, with one of your businesses that you're involved with. You also have a charitable branch, which I bring this up because we're going to end up talking in a bit about some of the stuff you do with the home group and the missions aspect. But even within business, you also still have a sort of missional arm to that. Can you talk a bit about why did you decide to have the charitable side of the businesses as well?
Yeah, as we've really grown in our relationship with the Lord, and He has molded and shaped and taught us, we want to serve, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. We want to hit every aspect of that, and so we don't want to miss Jerusalem. We don't want to miss those people that are right here in our backyard. We want our emphasis to be where God currently has us in the moment, and so a lot of that stemmed from wanting to make a difference where we live and wanting to serve the families that are around us and wanting that to be a platform that we can then share the gospel and leverage the power and the majesty of who Jesus is in the community that's around us. So, we launched the nonprofit about 3 or 4 years, I think, or so after the initial launch of the first for-profit business. And our aim there is to change the trajectory of a child's life. And so we come alongside children in the Memphis area and really just try and serve to radically change the trajectory of where they can go and try and make generational impact. We want to do for one what we wish we could do for many. And the reality is we can't serve them all, but we want to do for one what we wish we could do for all.
And for people listening, I will get links to some of your businesses so that for people that may be interested in finding out more about that, maybe even some business partnerships, who knows? The information will be in the description box for you to check out.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
So, Chris, can you take us on a bit of a journey? Andrew mentioned that you're a house group, and I would like to just say we're part of that, which is a great joy to us and people who know us well and right across the world. I just want to say we've found a place where every dynamic of what you have heard us teach some of you over many years, it's being lived out. So you can imagine our joy, but we'll come into some of that as we go along. So you haven't always been part of a house church, or can you tell us a bit of your journey that led you there?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I think, to be honest, in order to fully grasp the full picture of how we ended up, I have to actually moonwalk it all the way back, just to some of my own biblical heritage. And I just cherish the biblical heritage that I have on both sides of my family lineage. But one set of my grandparents were missionaries in South Africa for I think over 30 years. My father and all of his siblings were all born and raised in South Africa, and I was invited when I moved to Memphis. I was blessed to be introduced into an amazing disciple-making community that we have in Memphis. Very focused on the Great Commission and very focused on what it means to live out the gospel and what it means to make disciples of all nations. And I spent a couple of years underneath a gentleman by the name of Herb Hodges, who had truly global impact. And Herb unfortunately passed away in 2018. And when he did, there was a group of us that were kind of all sitting underneath his leadership at the same time when he died. And we said, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with this? How do we faithfully make sure that the immense impact that he's made doesn't stop here? And so one morning I was spending some time with the Lord, and I had been given a gift when my last grandmother passed away. I was given one of my grandfather's teaching Bibles, and my grandfather passed away almost 30 years ago at this point, about 25 years ago. And I opened it up and I read Psalm 2 was the Psalm for the day. And so I got down to verse 8, and it's, ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. Reading out of ESV. And in the margin, my grandfather he had circled that verse, and he had written the word Africa. And he truly believed that was where God was leading him, and God was calling him, and he faithfully served that until he unfortunately was almost forced out of the mission field. And that very same day, I got a phone call from a guy inviting me to come to Africa for the very first time. He called me. He said, Chris, I've got a trip. I'm headed to West Africa, and I want you to come with me. I said, Lord, you don't speak much more clearly than that. So absolutely 100%. That led me and my co-labor partner, who I know you all have had on as a guest as well, led us down a journey of what the global church really looked like, and really opened our eyes to just this picture of what the bride looks like across the entire globe. And so from that very first trip, we really wrestled with, how do we train, equip, love, and serve these pastors that are all over the world, when our picture, our everyday view of the bride just looks differently. And so that started a couple of year journey for us, where we really wrestled with, what does Scripture say about how do we faithfully be the church, and how does the church represents themselves and loves others well in so many different ways. And so we really wrestle with this, and we have the way that the bride has served us over the course of our pursuit of Jesus, for my wife and I, over the last 12 to 15 years, has been incredible at every different stage, from large legacy church to home church. We have been blessed by every church we've been a part of. And we were overseas at the beginning part of 2020, and had initially been starting the process of being trained in what this could look like to lead and steward home gatherings, and how we really see them move and change across the globe. And when we all know COVID hit in 2020, and I was actually overseas when Trump shut down travel from Europe, and I made it home. And when I came home and everything shut down, it was like, Lord, I think you've given us the perfect opportunity to give this a try. So we launched our home church in the summer of 2020, and it has grown and flourished, and it's been amazing ever since.
Of course, to people listening who are in Asia and in some of these really hard nations, what we are describing to them is normal.
Yes.
It is where, under persecution and pressure, the Holy Spirit drives the church. But we don't want to be in the situation of being driven there. We want to enter joyfully, freely, and gladly, so that when the time comes where we do need to be there, we're already at home in that situation.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. We're seeing more and more now pastors of not just people like you, individuals that have decided they're gonna do the home church thing. We're seeing more and more pastors of mega churches also saying, actually, the way that we are doing church isn't going to work going forward. We see the tides are turning, the pressures are changing in the countries, especially in the Western church, and so we need to change the way we are doing things. So we're seeing a lot of them starting to look more focusedly at small groups, at groups meeting in the homes. So it says this is something actually that's going on quite a lot around the world, and even more so in the West right now as well.
So what reasons do you see people are starting part of home groups, or as some would call it, the disciple making movement?
Yeah, I think for us, and we have a lot of fruit, and y'all can attest. We've been blessed in so many different ways with the way that the Lord has gathered the bride and that is represented within ourselves. But for us, it truly is biblical intimacy and true biblical community. I think the reality is it's so challenging in larger settings sometimes to just find those groups and live truly in the unity of the Spirit. You know, Jesus very clearly in John 8:35 that the world will know we are His by the way we love one another. And it can just be challenging to do that. And so a lot of times when we have families that come and they may spend a season, they may just spend a Sunday, but the reality is, you know, they truly feel the intimacy that we have and the way that we truly are able just to love one another in a more real, radical and concise way, and that we can do life with one another. And so we've just found that to be, you know, probably the greatest fruit that has come from our time.
Yeah. Could you talk a bit about that? Because, you know, people may have house groups and they may meet once a week and they say that they are relationally connected. There's an intimacy between them, and you can have that in those gatherings, but yeah, you don't stop there. I know, for example, there is one specific, I don't know what you'd call it, a cafe. It's not really a cafe, but place where we've gone for meetings multiple times, and almost every time we get there, one of you's there, meeting with someone else from the group, having conversations. And so, you know, we see this happening, and we don't even have to plan it. We just turn up, and we're pretty much guaranteed we might bump into one of you. So could you just talk a bit about how that fleshes out in between those weekly meetings?
Yeah, you know, it's going to boil down to intentionality.
Yeah.
And our goal just always is like, how much can we make our lives overlap, and how are we going to be intentional to make that happen? And a lot of that just has naturally happened over time as we've just kind of continued to pursue and just grow through doing life together. But a lot of us either have been in discipleship relationships over the years with one another. We really view ourselves as kind of co-labor partners. We're pursuing the mission alongside each other. And when you start the process of pursuing mission together, it takes your intimacy to a whole nother level. I once heard it said that for every day you spend with somebody overseas, for instance, it's like a year of friendship in the States, or a year of friendship somewhere where you're only meeting with them, you know, maybe you're only seeing them maybe once a week. And so for us, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to go spend, you know, a season serving together or doing something, you're like compounding that intimacy, and you're just growing together. And in the pursuit of the mission, I think truly is when you start to become, you know, this one body of who Christ really is. And sure, it's messy, and sure, it's hard, but it's just this constant goal of just overlapping our life. And certainly some seasons are better than others. But yeah, life overlap.
I think from our experience with y'all, or should I say with y'all, one way or the other, there is a supernatural aspect to this. There is something that God can and is wanting to supernaturally do. I can remember being invited by Noel who has been on a previous podcast, you can link him, to come to the group. And we came, and you were all sitting in the driveway. So, on chairs. So there was no formality of being in the house and everything. We saw the children, everybody. And it looked like family, and we felt like family. And that, I would say, doesn't come except through prayer and fasting. It's not something you can organise to happen and say to people who just turn up, right, okay, now you're here and now you can. It is something you're drawn into because of what Jesus is doing in the midst of you. Mm. So, yeah, I know from what you're saying is from our own personal experience too. Yeah,
sometimes people have their home groups, their home churches, their cell groups. Now, sometimes they so love each other's company that the focus remains on each other, and it stays insular. There's no real looking out. Now, whether that's intentional or not is another discussion, but sometimes it can just develop that way. I love spending time with Chris, and so I'm so focused on Chris, I'm not so focused on who's outside of the group. Now, I know with you and with Noel, missions isn't just something you do. It's a part of your fabric. It's a part of your DNA. You just can't help but be missional. Now, there may be people in the group that are not like that, or maybe weren't like that. How have you been intentional with making sure that the group doesn't just stay focused within itself?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really just this. To your point, it's kind of been ingrained into who we are. It's the fibers of our body, and I think for us, it's how God has wired us. And we certainly have the whole spectrum of missionality represented for us, and the Lord uses that in so many different ways. But we really experienced this the first time with a family. We have a goal of trying to have a weekly rhythm of at least going out with somebody else from the church, ideally, into these kind of relational communities that we've been given to try and truly share the gospel and just be really intentional about deepening those relationships. And the Lord delivered us a family, and one family in particular, initially, that he gifted us. And we had gone out, and we had actually taken our children with us, and they were kind of a part of this. And we went to a park as a family, and a couple of us families. And the kids were playing, and we were kind of meeting these kind of families through the kids. As the kids were playing, we were able to chat with the adults, and we met one family in particular, and were able to strike a relationship with them. They had a Hindu background, and we just loved them, and they loved us, and they invited us into their home, and we went and we shared a meal, and we shared some coffee and got to know one another. And then we were able to reciprocate the hospitality and invite them in. And through that initial interaction as a family, and then as a church, of us just being able to love them well, they gathered with us off and on for about 6 months before they ultimately had to move for his job, for the husband's job in the family. And so that was kind of the initial start of us really realizing that as a church, we can be incredibly missional. And when they left, we asked them, and we were pretty transparent. We said, is there anything that you guys are going to take away from just being able to see us do life? And they said 2 things. They said, the way y'all pray and the way you guys love one another. And if that's the testimony that we as a bride have of any size before the lost, then yes and amen. The way that we seek the Lord, the way that we pray, the way that we worship Him, and the way that we love one another, yes and amen. And so that then has led to us trying to even now partner with different organizations here in the local Memphis area to love and serve kind of the refugee families that are coming in, and we're striving now to continue those relationships in a way that will just let us continue the process of serving as a whole church, as a body, not just one member going out and trying to serve alone, but actually as a community, as a full body. trying to serve in that way. So it's been good.
Could you actually just talk a bit about this one? I've seen the messages, and whoever the organization is, they've kind of got an ABC, and you can kind of pray about which one that you would like to be connected to. And you've asked the group, hey, can you guys read through this, be praying about it? Can you talk a bit more about that? I mean, I guess, you could in theory just go, we're going to go with this one. But you're engaging the entire community in this decision because it's for all of you to do. It's not just you that's going to be connected to them. That's
right. Yeah. This has been a really fun journey. Yeah. There's an amazing organization here in the local Memphis area called Asha's Refuge. And they've just, they're starting to try and do this. And they want to find groups similar in size to ours. And they want to help just start to partner some of these families that can help them beyond what they can help. Them as an organization, they specialize in that kind of first 90 days of a refugee coming to Memphis and kind of their feet landing in Memphis and serving them for those first 90 days as they make some of those initial transitions. But as anybody who's listening can probably understand and sympathize with, the reality is the real challenges really don't come in those first 90 days. It's it's the 90 days to a year to 2 years when they're really having to figure out, okay, now I'm on my own. How do I get a driver's license? And how do I do basic things? How do I enroll my kids in school? And so we really felt like, hey, here's an opportunity for us to step in and love some families, or a family to start, right, in this way. And so we went through the process of all going through the proper training, designating one kind of key member of each household to be represented on a smaller committee inside of that can help make some of the logistical decisions around how we can better serve and love them as a family. And now we're just in this process of truly praying and seeking the Lord to say, hey, Lord, you've given us now a couple different options in front of us of families that we know need to be served. And the reality is, like, while we may serve one family in particular, there's going to be secondary and even tertiary impact in their communities, because as these refugees are coming in, they're being placed in similar communities with people from their own countries. So, we're going to have that opportunity to serve one family, but there will be others that we'll have influence into and be able to touch. And again, as a family, as a church family, it's one of the ways that we can truly serve and love alongside each other. So that's been pretty cool.
So you keep using the word family, and we hear people say church family, and we look around and we think family is multi-generational. I don't see a lot of family going on here. Can you talk to us, when you say family, you mean family? Can you talk to us about how you've engaged your own children and truly made this a multi-generational community and experience?
It's I think I said earlier that intimacy was probably the greatest fruit that we've seen kind of as we've been on this journey for the last few years. And I may need to actually recant that. The fruit in our own children very well may be by far the greatest fruit that we have seen. The opportunity for us to engage our kids in the ministry that we are doing as a body has been very impactful. And so, for instance, many of our older kids can already communicate the gospel. They can communicate why we take Lord's Supper. They can communicate what the elements represent. They can, just to brag on my oldest for a minute, when last time we were overseas, three of the four at the time, men from the church, all overseas together, my daughter was in school asking for prayer for us as a family, for the men that were represented in her church that she knew, and she doesn't just view the other men that were with us as just these other guys. These guys, they're uncles, right? Like they truly are family. And, the other kids that are represented they are best friends. They are family. They talk about each other. They love one another well. So it's just been this process of really growing together, which cannot happen overnight. It 100% takes time. It takes the Lord's gift, but we've been really blessed. It truly feels like family.
you use the word older kids. Now, I don't know what people listening are imagining in their mind, but can you give an age range of these, what you're calling older kids?
Yeah. We have roughly in the ballpark of 20 kids that are represented as a gathering. They all range in age from 9 and under. So as you can imagine, and as the two of you can attest, Sunday mornings at our house can be a little bit chaotic at times as we learn how to adjust and work around the chaos of having the kids with us. But again, that's been the greatest fruit. Every week they share in our care time as they check on one another, and they greet one another at the door, and we spend that time together. They worship alongside us. They're reading their Bibles together. We do an intentional time with them as a part of the gathering too. So they are learning and they are growing. And as we pray, and even as they pray more intimately, you can see the fuel of encouragement as they encourage and spur one another on to love and good deeds. You can see as one is courageous enough to step up and say, I'm going to pray, and they pray, then you start to see the others step in and be encouraged by what they're doing. And they say, okay, well, now I want to pray. And now I want to pray. And we're starting to even see how their prayers are influencing one another's. So it just, again, like we're starting to see this generational, right, impact of this next generation that we're praying and prayerfully hoping there's going to be this community that will grow up together that can always rely on one another, that knows the DNA that they grew up with and that they were trained by, to say, hey, the world may not be necessarily pursuing the kingdom in this way, but I know other, at that time now, men and women that have been grown up and have a vision for what it means to make disciples of all nations.
Well, I don't know about us seeing chaos. I know what I do see. I see a lot of role modelling going on.
Yes.
Quite incidental. I mean, I'll give a couple examples. I saw two of the little boys, and they were the little boys, sitting together in the worship, and they had their one Bible open between them, and one of them had a pencil. I don't think he could read. I really don't think he could read. And he was underlining parts of his Bible, and they're both in agreement with this underlining. You don't get taught that. That's what you're role modelled, watching an adult, a parent maybe, have so much of a love for the word that they're underlining parts, and I see a lot of that going on. I even saw, just to make listeners smile, I saw one of the younger boys, he was listening, and somehow he must have seen an adult listening to somebody talking in the gathering with a pencil behind his ear. And this boy, he spent about 5 minutes trying to get that pencil balanced behind his ear so that he could sit and listen to what was being spoken to him. When he got it behind his ear, he sat and listened. Now,
I remember that, because I remember looking, you were kind of right behind him. When I was looking, I could see you trying not to laugh while you watched him trying to mimic the adult.
But while it sounds funny, I think it is hugely significant that they have role models, and they're growing within God's community in the very natural way that they grow in homes, which is mostly through role modeling. Yeah. So chaos, no, I see things like that when I'm there.
Well, I mentioned Herb Hodges earlier, this man that was able to pour the last few years of his life into a few of us. And the reality is he always used to have this saying about disciple making. He would say, disciple making is caught, it's not taught.
Yes.
You can't teach disciple making, it's caught. It's the vision, it's not caught, it's taught. And I think the reality is we could say that about anything. We could say that about how we're training and discipling our children, just in what they see and what they see us do. What's important to us as a family is going to be important to them. And
yeah.
So
this is a really good example of something that we say in our conferences, and people listening may have heard us say this before, but how sometimes we're asked to go and speak about parents discipling their kids, and the implication is that parents don't know how to disciple their kids. And so we often say to these rooms of pastors, sometimes thousands of them, how many of you think parents don't know how to disciple their kids? Put your hand up. And that's what all the pastors put their hands up. And we say, okay, how many of you, so let's take Brazil, for example, thousands of pastors, we say, how many of you like football? Real football, not American football, real football. And and so they all put their hand up. And we say, how many of you have kids that support a football team? So all the hands go up. And then we say, how many of you have kids that support the same football team as you? And then they all start calling out football teams' names. And my mum calls out Manchester United, otherwise she'd be in trouble. And then we say, see, parents do know how to disciple their kids. They discipled them in football. And basically we go on to say, look, you catch what you're passionate about. The next generation will catch what you're passionate about. Discipleship is from passion. If you are passionate, you can't help but pass these things on. If you're passionate about sport, you will pass it on. If you're passionate about music, you will pass music on. And so whether you know it or not, you are discipling the next generation. The question is, what are you passionate about? And have we lost our passion for Jesus, or have we become more passionate about other things above Jesus? And, what we see happening in your group is that you know others are, you are missional. It is just who you are. And so what is an outworking of that? Well, once we went to visit Noel's family and we walked in, and one of Noel's sons took my mum, sat her down on the sofa.
I mean, he took me the minute I walked in the door. That was it.
And then what did he do?
He took me and he took me and he looked me in the eye and says, do you know Jesus? I mean, I just walk in the door. So I said, well, will you tell me about him? I thought it might be rather fun. So I sat on the sofa, and I think he went from Genesis to Revelation as I patiently sat there for about 15 minutes while he checked me out if I knew Jesus. That was impressive. Yeah. Really impressive.
And so it is caught. They just catch it. You can't help it. But could you maybe talk a bit more about that? How are maybe examples from you and your family, or maybe examples of some of the other families? Because I know that this isn't just you and this isn't just Noel's family, that you could point examples out in the others as well of how they have been intentional with their kids. But could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's always convicting and encouraging both at the same time when you see the actions of your kids and you see what they really do catch. And for us, just at the age stages that our kids are at 6 and under, going on 7 and under, for us at this point, it's been like, okay, how do I help encourage and teach them this true intimacy with the Lord? And I think the incredible thing, and one of the things that the Lord has been doing in my heart over the last few years, is the realization that God has wired each one of my kids so differently, and he is going to introduce himself to them in radically different ways. And so for me, it's been, okay, Lord, I want to make sure that my children know how to meet you where you are, and they know how to come and seek and find you and develop this intimacy with you, but they're going to do it in different ways. So my oldest is a typical oldest child, right? She does everything by the book. It's all, and so I can already see the inner workings of her heart as she is going to just deeply desire to need to earn God's love. And so I'm already seeing, okay, all right, I'm going to have to start to teach her what it looks like, not to have to earn it, but to rest in who she is in light of how much God loves her and cares for her and the sacrifice he made for her. I take her as one example, and I'll flip it to my other daughter, who's a couple years younger than she is, one of the twins. And she is so incredibly gifted and artistic and musically inclined that she is going to meet the Lord in and through her worship, and in and through how the Lord is going to introduce her. So where on one side, I may be walking my oldest through prayer and just loving being with the Lord, regardless of what she's doing. On the other side, I'm trying to teach my 4-year-old how to lovingly meet the Lord in worship. And we may sing a worship song every night while we're laying in bed together. You know what I mean? So there's just so many different ways. But for us, it's just been never being fearful of bringing them along in the process. Whatever we're doing, we want them to be doing it with us. So if we are serving at a food drive in Orange Mound and the kids aren't in school, we want the kids to be with us. if we are meeting with folks from around the world, loving on missionaries from around the world, we want our kids to be doing that with us. And as our kids are now starting to get older, we're already starting to figure out, okay, well, as we start to do even more missional things outside of the United States, okay, now how are we going to start to incorporate them? At this point, it's easy for them to pray for, and similar to my oldest in her classes this past year, it's easy for her to be praying for and be communicating like what we're doing as a body, and she can see and experience the difference. So it's just inviting them, it's taking them along in the process and not being fearful of saying they're too young or they're not able to, you know what I mean? They won't understand. It doesn't matter what they can or can't understand. It's what they're seeing and experiencing. They're going to look back. They're not going to remember the words that we say necessarily. They're going to remember what happened. They're going to remember the senses. They're going to remember what's around them. They're just going to remember the way that they live life.
Well, of course, Andrew, with his sister, grew up travelling the nations with me from childhood. So I would just say, Chris, take a long, hard look at what's sitting in front of you and make up your mind if this really is the route that you want to go.
Hey, if either of my boys can grow a beard like that, we're going to be in good shape.
So as we get towards the end, I just want to take this discipleship to focus on adults. I see in so many churches we have a discipleship class. This is the discipleship book. This is the discipleship track. And I'm not saying any of those are irrelevant, but I think they're a part. They can play a part in the bigger picture of what discipleship truly is. The discipleship model biblically, it's like you say, walking alongside each other, the Moses, the Joshua, the Jesus, the disciples, the Paul, the Timothys, all the way through. It is a lifestyle of sharing discipleship with moments of teaching, etc., thrown in. How do you see the discipleship of the adults working out or being lived out in this situation?
Do you mean in the situation with us as a church specifically?
Yes. Yeah, with the gathering. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, we already have natural discipleship relationships. Even before we initially started meeting together, there were already kind of discipleship relationships that were natural, that were already happening. They were just kind of invited, and it just made the most sense. It was kind of almost the next evolution of discipleship, is really bringing them in and saying, hey, we're going to go on this journey together, right? I feel like so many people view discipleship, they feel like, well, I've got to have everything figured out. I've got to be able to answer all the questions. I've got to know all my stuff. And then once I know everything, well, then great. Now I can train and I can teach somebody. Again, honestly, similar to our kids, that's not the most impactful form of discipleship. The reality is the most impactful form is to say, I don't know if I really know the answer. Let me show you how I'm going to go figure it out. Walk with this in me. Let the Lord sanctify and transform both of us in this process as we learn and grow together. And so we've seen that from everything from taking guys overseas for the first time and allowing them to experience the church or the bride around the world and really what that looks like, to at the same time just, hey, we're going to lovingly serve together alongside each other. And to your point, Daphne, like, even though like there still are set times where we try and gather together to do specific teaching, like that still is one firm piece of the puzzle. You know, we try and look at discipleship in kind of three different phases. All right. We have knowledge-based discipleship, right? I'm going to teach you what the Lord has gifted me, what I have been taught, I'm going to transfer to you. We have obedience-based discipleship. So as you see me being obedient, you follow me and you encourage me. The greatest form of accountability in our life is somebody that's following after us. The greatest form of accountability is somebody whose eyes are on us. So we have knowledge-based discipleship, obedience-based discipleship, and communion-based discipleship, right? This idea of just being with the Lord. And this is where we get our prayer and our worship, and like come alongside us as we pray together. We seek the Lord's face together. You know, we just live in his presence. So the reality is, if we think through these three different forms of discipleship, knowledge-based discipleship, obedience-based discipleship, and communion-based discipleship, we want to be in the middle. We want to be a mixture of all those things. We want to be growing in our knowledge of who the Lord is and experiencing him while we obey him. And in that obedience, as John 14:21 says, he's going to manifest himself to us, and we're going to be able to live in communion with him on a daily basis. So we want to experience all three kind of facets of this kind of forms of discipleship, and they all have their pitfalls. So if we get too focused on one, if we get too focused on our knowledge-based discipleship, we're not going to be focused on obeying, and we're not going to be focused on being. It's going to be just, hey, let me sit down, let me teach you this lesson so you can teach it to somebody else. But it's not really being ingrained. Same with obedience. If we focus solely on obedience-based discipleship, everything becomes works-based, right? And communion, if we just focus on communion-based discipleship, we'll have radical intimacy with the Lord, but we may not know much truly about who he is, and we may not be obedient to him. So there is this sweet spot in the middle that we find in kind of adult-based discipleship that we strive for. And certainly we're still learning many lessons as we go through that. We fail forward, but the Lord has been gracious. So he's made us fruitful.
And within the small group, of course, there's the whole network. It's families discipling families, and husbands and wives, and it all plays out quite naturally. And I just want to say, as we finish, to listeners again, what you're hearing Chris saying isn't an isolated happening. It is happening across the world. Maybe not in exactly the same way that Chris has described, although that is our greatest joy. But there are many churches that we know that are already saying, how do we do this? We need to do this. What we have is not going the way we want to. And if there's any pastors listening, and who want to, I would encourage you to reach out to Chris. Very often when we go to people to advice, or you go to conferences, you're going to look at something that's way further down the road than you are. And I often think that's very discouraging, and the people who are further down the road have forgotten what it was like to be at the beginning. And so I think where you're at is a prime moment in time to be able to help those who are saying, we want to go on this journey. And I think we'll have to have Chris back, because there's a lot more we could talk about that came up in this.
No, I think it's been really good. A lot of really good practical things that people can do on numerous levels, from the discipleship to being extremely missional, not just home, but also abroad. So really encourage people to listen through this and say, what is there in here that I could take on? And we can use it within your groups wherever you are around the world. So Chris, we miss being with you all, but thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we miss you guys. We love you guys dearly.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.